The last couple of classes, we've been looking at the story of the war of against the city of Ai. The first campaign against Ai, the second campaign against Ai, with all of its complexities. Ai is a very complex story, and we're still in Parak Chet, but we're in the next piece of this parak, which is after a paragraph break, Parshas Ptucha. We have the following six psukim, which in and of itself sounds very kind of tag on postscript, but we'll see it's really a very profound and a very significant moment in the Sefer. So let's start from the text. Az yivnei Yehoshua mizbeach laHashem Elokei Yisrael b'har Eval. Then Yehoshua built an altar to God of Israel on Mount Eval. Kasher tzivah Moshe eved Hashem et Yisrael kakatuv b'Sefer Torah Moshe, in accordance with God, the instructions that Moshe had given to them, as it's written in the Torah, Mizbach Abanim Shlemot Asher Lo Hanif Alehem Barzel, an altar of stone, not hewn by iron, Vayalu Alav Olot Lashem Mizbechu Shlamim. And upon it they sacrificed offerings, Olot, Shlamim, burnt offerings, peace offerings, etc. Vayichtov Sham Al Ha'avanim, את משנה תורת משה שכתב לפני בני ישראל, wrote there upon the stones the words of the Torah, וכל ישראל וזקניו ושוטרים ושופטיו, all of Israel, elders, officers, judges, עומדים מזה ומזה לארון, standing on each side of the ark, נגד הכהנים הלוויים נושאי ארון ברית השם, facing the ark carried by the Kohanim, Kager Kezrach, Chetzio Mul HaGrizim, Chetzio Mul HaEval. Half of them facing Har Grizim, half facing Har Eval. Kasher Tziva Moshe Eved Hashem Levarech Am Yisrael Barishona, as Moshe had commanded them to bless the people. V'achreichein kara et kol divrei Torah habracha v'aklala. Then he read the words of the Torah, the blessing and the curse, Kichol HaKatuv b'Sefer Torah, as written in the Torah. There was not a word that Moshe had instructed Yehoshua to read that he did not read before the congregation of Israel, Hanashim ve'ataf ve'ager, the women, the children, the ger, whatever the word ger here means, stranger, or we'll see a little bit more about that reference later on. Ha'olech b'kivam. This was all done on Hagrizim and Ha'eval. So that's a very famous vignette, a very famous story that appears instruction in the Torah to build this altar and to, in fact, bring this, engage in this ceremony or conduct this entire ceremony of blessings and curses, referenced here at the end very clearly, Divrei Torah habracha ve'aklala, and the mountains of Hagrizim and Ha'eval. All of this is a reference to a series of psukim in the Torah that are very straightforward, seemingly. You have it in Chumash Dvarim twice. Reference first in Sefer, in Parshat Re'eh, in Dvarim Perek Yud Aleph. You have the following psukim. Re'eh anochi noten lifnechem hayom bracha uklala. This is now back to the Torah. So this, when it says in Yehoshua that this was all in accordance with what the Torah had instructed, these are the psukim in the Torah to which the Navi is referring. Bracha uklala, blessing and curses. Et bracha asher tishma'u el mitzvot Hashem Elokechem asher anochi mitzvah etchem hayom. The blessing that you should, if you will observe the mitzvot, and the klala, the curses, if you don't listen to the commandments. It's a consequence of a brit of the consequences. It will be when you will come into the land that God will give you as an inheritance. You will set the blessings on Mount Grizim and the curses on Mount Eval. Halohema be'ever hayarden. Now they're still in the desert. They're still in Ever Hayarden. They're still in Eretz Moav. So to tell them to go to two mountains called Grizim and Areval while they're sitting in the midbar, that's a little bit of an obscure reference. So the Torah goes out of its way to tell us exactly where these mountains are. Halohema be'ever hayarden achrei derech mavo hashemesh. They are on the other side of the Jordan. They're on the west side. Derech mavo hashemesh is the road that goes westward. Shemesh is the sun setting. The Eretz HaKnaniya Yoshev Ba'arava Mula Gilgal Etzel Elanimore, the land of Canaan, opposite Arava, opposite Gilgal, near Elanimore, which is Shem. Because you're going into the land of Israel, you need to engage this entire ceremony of Blachot and Klalot so that you will observe the mitzvot Ushmatem Lasot Kol HaChokim VeHaMishpatim. So let's see if there's a map here. No map. Actually, I'm going to pull up a map. Sorry, I meant to pull this up earlier. Apologies for that. We're just going to pull up the wall map. Right, just kind of a quick reference in terms of can everybody see the map that I just pulled up? Right, so they're sitting here in Ever when Moshe is speaking, they're in Ever Hayarden, they're here in the land of God. When Yehoshua has conquered Ai, the base camp is in Gilgal. Ai is here near Beit El, where they just had this war. But the mountains of Grizim and Areval are near Shechem. And this road, as they cross over the Yarden, this is what we refer to as Derech Mavo Shemesh. The road that goes from the Jordan River westward. It's a road that cuts through the valley. It's the same road that Yaakov took when after his encounter with Esav near the Abok River, and it says Ve'avo Yaakov Shalem Ir Shechem. This is the road that goes from the Jordan River to Shechem. That's called Derech Mavo Shemesh, and that essentially leads directly to Shechem. Because they crossed here at Gilgal, they can't just go up to this Derech Mavo Shemesh, so they go to Ai first, and then they're going to go north to Shechem. Don't ask me now how they get from Ai to Shechem and then back to Gilgal without a single battle along the way. That's a question we'll address at a later time, but it's a valid question. I'm going to leave it for now. All right. So this is the story of the ceremony of blessings and curses, which was conducted on Hagrizim and Areval. It's referenced in the Torah twice. It's referenced in the Torah. It's referred to in the Torah both in Dvarim Yud Aleph, which is the psukim we just read, and it's referred to again in the actual broader, longer version of the text, which is in Dvarim Chav Zayin, namely the Parshiot of Kitavo. Parsha of Kitavo, meaning the actual blessing and curses that were part of the Tochacha, and there in Parsha Kitavo we find the instructions in more detail, and they're sort of describing the same event. Vayitzav Moshe v'ziknei Yisrael ta'am lemor shamot kol hamitzvah she'anachim mitzvah etchem hayom. God, Moshe instructs the people, observe the commandment I command you today. Vayabayom asher tavru et hayarden. Listen to this phrase is important for us. And the day that you cross over the Jordan, you shall set great stones, cover them with plaster. We actually looked at these psukim when we talked about the stones they took out of the Jordan River, if you remember, and where they put those stones. Write on these stones the words of the Torah after you've passed over the Jordan. So that you will come into the land flowing with milk and honey. What do you do with these stones when you cross over the Yarden? You will set these stones on Mount Eval. What did the text in Yehoshua say? That Az Yivnei Yehoshua Mizbeach Bahar Eval. Yehoshua built a Mizbeach on Har Eval. And that's exactly what the Torah instructed him to do. Vanita Shem Yisbeach, Hashem Elokecha b'mizbeach habanim, nifalem barzel. It's exactly the instruction, word for word. There's a whole archaeological study of this Mizbeach. They claim they found this Mizbeach, and it dates back to Yehoshua. There was a very famous archaeological dig on Har Eval. Not a subject for today, but it's just a fascinating concept. If you're interested in a video about it, on this website, alatorah.org, on this chapter, Yehoshua Perek Chet, if you go to this website, you can open it up yourself, and you click on the double box here at the top, you will open up what is referred to as Olama Mikra, and there are all kinds of videos about this Mizbeach and Har Eval and the archaeological dig of what they found and how they found it. Okay. That's for further study if you're interested. The rest of this is the instructions of this enormous ceremony that was about to take place. This is how the ceremony would unfold. There's a group of tribes that would stand on Har Grizim as you cross over the Yarden, and they are Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Yosef, and Benjamin. And there's a separate set of tribes that will stand on Har Eval, representing the curses. Reuven, Gad, Asher, Zvulun, Dan, and Naphtali. Split the tribe, 6 and 6, 6 on Har Grizim, 6 on Har Eval. And then the Leviim standing in the middle would express these words of this blessing and curse, blessings and curses, and they would say them out loud. And they would begin. The cursed is the person who makes an engraved image, an abomination, etc. And the people will answer Amen. And so on and so forth. There's an entire list of statements all by Arur, or curses. It doesn't describe the blessings. Chazal say that for each Or there was a corresponding blessing. So you had a Baruch and you had an Or. Fine. And then you had the rest of the Parsha of Kitavo. I seem to have trouble with this website in that there is a delay in its loading, which I apologize for. This one's not on me. Okay. Well, we're going to skip that because it's not going anywhere. Okay. Be that as it may, that the Parshat of Perek Chet continues the description of the Tochacha, the very famous Tochacha, Parshat Ki Tavo. I'm not going to be able to unpack it now because it's not loading. Be that as it may, the ceremony, I think, is straightforward. You have 6 tribes in Har Grizim, 6 tribes in Har Eval, the Kohanim and the Leviim in the middle, and they are describing this blessing and curses, essentially the Tochacha as it is described in the Parshat Ki Tavo. It's just an interesting observation. Why Shechem? Why Har Grizim and Har Eval? And why these specific tribes? It's a bit of an odd list of tribes to be. So where's that list? It's a bit of an odd list. Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Yosef, and Benjamin on Har Grizim for the bracha. Reuven, Gad, Asher, Zvulun, Dan, and Naphtali on Har Eval for the curses.
Yosef didn't have a tribe. It's like
it was Ephraim and Menashe. Okay, so Yosef is Ephraim and Menashe together. That's either way. The tribes are listed in the Torah.
Oh, so they have 7, so it's not even.
Well, that's why it's Yosef is 1. The way the tribes are listed in the Torah is consistent. There's always 12. If you include Levi in the list, then Yosef is a single tribe. If you don't include Levi in the list, then Yosef gets split into Ephraim and Menashe. Every single place in Tanakh where the tribes are listed, you'll find there's only ever 12. You have to navigate between either listing Levi and Yosef is one, or not listing Levi because he doesn't get land, and listing Yosef is a double portion because it goes by land. Right? That's a consistent pattern throughout Tanakh. You can check it. But what's just interesting is why these tribes. I once heard a theory, very interesting theory. I have to check it more consistently. But if you look at the map from the perspective of, and I have to expand a little bit, from the perspective of what the Torah had set out as the boundaries of the biblical boundaries of Israel, meaning from the Nile down here to the Euphrates up here in the top somewhere, then more or less Shechem is in the center of the country. It's not exactly center. Yerushalayim is typically identified as the center of the country. Yerushalayim is a little bit further south. Shechem more or less becomes the center of the country, and if Hagrizim and Hareval are here in Shechem, then the tribes of Yehuda, Shimon, Binyamin, Ephraim, Menashe, which is Yosef, are more or less the tribes from Shechem southward. And the tribes of Reuven, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, where's Dan in this list? Reuven, Gad, Asher, Zvulun, Dan, and Naphtali. Zvulun, Dan, which is here in the north, and Naphtali, are more or less the tribes north of Shechem. And so it geographically divides the tribes and places 6 of them on one mountain, 6 of them on the other mountain, almost as if to say, okay, you represent the north end of the country, you represent the south end of the country, Shechem is in the middle. And by geography, this is sort of an encapsulation, a mini encapsulation of all of the tribes of Israel. It's not a random list of tribes, it's more or less divided by where the tribes settled. You have the tribes of the north and the tribes of the south, and then you have this ceremony of Hagriz, of the brachot and klalot that unfolds. Okay. So far, pretty straightforward. And here's where things get a little dicey, which is the question of what is the significance of this entire ceremony and why was it necessary? That gets into a much more of a conjecture as to what's going on in this ceremony. And I want to draw your attention specifically to the reference in Yehoshua to he builds this Mizbeach, and again, because there's no Yerushalayim to speak of, and there's no Shiloh to speak of, because the Mishkan is in Gilgal. So if you had to pick a place in Israel that had a kind of a significance, historical significance, and they build a Mizbeach there, etc., picks Shechem, either because of its connection to the history of the Avos in Sefer Bereshis, or it's also possible because it was literally the center of the country. 6 tribes to the north, 6 tribes to the south. Be that as may, he builds a Mizbeach. There's another reason for picking Shechem, but we'll get to that next week. He builds this Mizbeach in the middle, on this mountain, and then he has the ceremony, blessings and curses, right? 6 tribes on one side of the mountain, 6 tribes on the other side of the mountain. Chetziel mul hagrizim, Chetziel mul ha'eval, half on one, half on the other. Livarech et ha'am, to bless the people. V'achrechen kara et kol divrei haTorah habracha v'haklala. And then he read the words of the Torah, the words of the blessings and the curses. And the assumption is, and I think it's correct, that this is a reference to the performance of exactly this ceremony that the Torah describes as the blessings and curses on Hagrizim and Hareb. I'm going to pick up on this phrase, Karat Kol Divrei Torah Azot. What did he read and why is it significant? But before we do that, does any of this sound familiar from a Chumash story? Building a Mizbeach, bringing offerings, setting the tribes, 12 tribes, 6 and 6, dividing somehow half and half, reading the Torah, the people responding then with Amen.
Hanukat HaMishkan.
Not so directly. I'm looking for something much more direct.
ברית בין הבתרים?
Even that's not as, I mean, there is a half and half in the Brit Ben Abtamim, but you don't have all the pieces that you have here. All the pieces you have here, there's only one place in Chumash. And let's take a quick look. It's Shmot Perek of Dalet. Shmot Perek of Dalet is a very odd perek. Just to put it in perspective, the chapter numbers here are significant. The Mamad Har Sinai takes place in Shemot chapters 19 and 20. Following Mamad Har Sinai, what parsha comes after Parshat Yitro?
Mishpatim.
Mishpatim. And at the very end of Mishpatim, so you have, just to go a quick bird's eye view of the prakim, let's hope this will work. This is the Aseret HaDibrot of Mamad Har Sinai in chapter 20. And at the end of it, we find the reference to how to build a Mizbeach. Mizbeach Adamat Taseli. You will make a Mizbeach, make it out of stone, make it out of the earth. There you will bring your offerings. And if you make a Mizbeach out of stone, Lo tivnet and gazit, you can't make it out of hewn stone because you can't place a sword upon it. Right? So that's exactly what we have described by Yehoshua, that he makes us a mizbeach of avanim, but not hewn stones, rather than just natural stones in the natural state. And then the Torah continues in chapter 21 with Eila Mishpatim, long detailed instructions of Mishpatim, with all of the, without getting into the details here, Parshat Mishpatim is an elaboration on the Aseret HaDibrot. I don't know if you've heard that before, but literally one by one you can navigate, you can point to every mitzvah in Parshat Mishpatim as an expansion of one of the Aseret HaDibrot. Up until the very end, where it talks about the holidays as an expansion of Shabbat and Shemitah and Yovel. And then we get into Perek, we come to Perek of Dalet, which is the last chapter of Parshat Mishpatim. Ve'el Moshe Amar, Aleh el Hashem, Ata v'Aaron Nadav v'Avihu, v'shivim miziknei Yisrael, v'ishtachavitem merachok. God said to Moshe, go up to the mountain, you, Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu. And there, and the 70 elders, and bow from a distance. V'nigash, this Moshe levado el Hashem v'hem lo yigashu, Moshe alone will approach God in the mountain. Ve'yavo Moshe, v'yisaper la'am et kol divrei Hashem v'et kol ha'mishpatim. Moshe comes down the mountain and he tells the people all the words that God tells him, including all the statutes. Vayan kol ha'am kol echad v'yomru kol hadvarim asher diber Hashem na'aseh. To which the people respond and say, whatever God says, we will do. Vayichtov Moshe et kol divrei Hashem. Moshe wrote down the words of God. Vayashkem baboker, got up in the morning. Vayiven mizbeach tachat hahar, and he built a mizbeach under the mountain, or at the foot of the mountain. Ushtem esrei matzeva lishnei masar shiftei Yisrael, including 12 monuments for 12 tribes of Israel. Vayishlach et na'arei bnei Yisrael ve'elu olot vayizbechu zvachim shlamim, and he brought offerings, burnt offerings, peace offerings. Vayikach Moshe chatzi adam beyasim ba'ganot, and he took half the blood and he put it into basins. The chatzi adam zerak al mizbeach, and half the blood he threw on the altar, he sprinkled on the altar. Vayikach Sefer Habrit. Listen very carefully to this pasuk. Vayikach Sefer Habrit. He took the book of the covenant. Vayikra bo'oznei ha'am, and he read it to the people. Vayomru, they said, Kol asher diber Hashem, na'aseh v'nishma. Whatever God says, we will do and we will listen. For the record, this is the only reference to the declaration na'aseh v'nishma in all of Chumash. Meaning, the very famous comment that when Bnei Yisrael were offered the Torah, they said na'aseh v'nishma, appears in Shemot Perek Chav Daled, which is 4 chapters after the story of the revelation at Sinai and the giving of the Aseret HaDibrot in Parshat Yitro. And in response to Moshe reading the Sefer Habrit. Then Moshe took the blood, vayikach Moshe et hadam, vayizrok al ha'am, and he sprinkled it on the people. Vayomer, hinei dam habrit asher karat Hashem imachem. This is the blood of the covenant that God has made with you. I'll call it V'rimela. Moshe, Aaron, and the elders, and etc. They all go up the mountain. Vayurot Elokei Yisrael, and they have a vision of God's throne. And then God says to Moshe, "Come up the mountain alone. I will give you the tablets to instruct them." They go up the mountain. And he tells this Gainim, "You stay here with Chur, I'm going up alone." And the Shechina dwelt on Har Sinai. Covered the mountain for 6 days, and on the 7th day he called Moshe into the cloud. This vision of the cloud was like an eish ochelet berosh hahar, like a consuming fire at the top of the mountain. And Moshe stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. So you realize the question right away, which is, this is 4 chapters after the story of Ma'amad HaSinai, and yet it sounds like it's a prelude to Ma'amad HaSinai. Did they say Na'aseh v'nishma before they were given the Torah, or did they say it after they were given the Torah? In the events here, Moshe goes up the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. Is that after the revelation, or is that Moshe going up for the revelation and then staying on the mountain for 40 days? Because then what happens next is Chet Hegel. The mystery of this parak has confounded the Mefarshim through the ages. And there's a huge debate amongst the commentaries, from one end of the spectrum to the other. When is this chapter taking place? Is it in its sequence chronologically, or is it a earlier chapter, as Rashi suggests, that actually the entire Brit that is enacted here is before the giving of the Torah back in Pashat Yitro? Machloket Rishonim, Rashi, Ramban, and Ezra. I'll show you some of that in a moment. But before I do, I just want to point out the parallels. So I made this little chart for you, which appears in the source page, which you should have. And I just took parallel the language. In Ma'amad HaSinai, or in Shemot Perach of Daled, it says, "Vayiven mizbeach tachat ha'ar," he built a mizbeach under the mountain or by the mountain. And in our parak, it describes Yehoshua making a mizbeach on the mountain, B'har Eival. Moshe took 12 stones representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Yehoshua took 12 stones, and he took them up to Har Gerizim and Har Eival. Moshe offered olot uzvachim and shlamim. Yehoshua brought olot ushlamim. Moshe took half the dam, sprinkled it upon the people. Half the dam he sprinkled on the mizbeach, half the dam he sprinkled on the people as a symbol of the Brit. Yehoshua divides the people into 2 groups, half of them chetzio on Har Gerizim, chetzio on Har Eival. And Moshe took the Sefer HaBrit and he read it to the people. Yehoshua wrote the words of the Torah on these stones, Mishneh Torat Moshe, and he read it to the people. In Moshe's case, he's reading Sefer HaBrit, he's reading the Torah, he's reading the mitzvot. In Yeshua's case, he's reading Divrei.
No, we know what Sefer HaBrit is.
Oh, that's the question we're going to explore in a minute. Hold that question. That's the question of questions in this particular case. We'll get to in a second. Vayomru, the people said, Kol Hashem diber Hashem naseh v'nishma. And the parallels are striking, except for one problem. There is no response of naseh v'nishma in our parak. There is the assumption that the people said yes. There's an assumption that they answered amen, because that's how the ceremony describes it. I leave it as an open question. What happened to the reference to naseh v'nishma? But even the reference to naseh v'nishma is an odd reference in the context of the fact that in mind, if you ask anybody who's ever studied Chumash, most people, if you ask them, what does the phrase naseh v'nishma mean? Nasa v'nishma means that they accepted the Torah, right? Nasa before nishma, doing before hearing, meaning they accepted the Torah sight unseen. We've all heard this idea that God went around to all the medrash, that God went around to all the nations, he offered them the Torah, each one said what's written in it, and there's a conversation. People said, God comes to Moshe, to Bnei Israel, and they said, will you accept the Torah? They said yes. I don't know. I mean, there is such a medrash, right? There is a very famous medrash. I'll show it to you here. Darash Rabbi Simai b'shah shekdimu Yisrael nasa v'nishma, because the people of Israel placed the acceptance of the Torah we will do before the hearing of the Torah we will hear. So the angels came and they placed crowns on their heads, 2 crowns, one connected nasa, one for nishma. And then the Gemara goes on to say, "Amar Rabbi Loza b'shah shekdimu Yisrael nasa l'nishma yatztabatko v'yamar len migilad milvanai raz zeh shemalachei hasharet mishtamshim bo." Who revealed this great secret to my children, a secret that only the ministering angels know, that they accept God. B'chu Hashem malachei gibor koach oseh dvaro lishmoa b'kol dvaro. First oseh, first nasa, and then nishma, meaning they would. And there's all kinds of midrashim about the heretic who criticized Reb Zera for being hasty, accepting the Torah without hearing it, the Gedimu Nasa v'Nishma. All kinds of midrashim. I come back to the text. The text says, Vayikach Sefer Abrit, Moshe took the book of the covenant, read it to the people, Vayikra b'oznei ha'am, and they said Nasa v'Nishma. So what is the Sefer Abrit? What did Moshe read to them upon which they accepted the Torah? It's a big challenge, because if the assumption is that they accepted the Torah without hearing what the mitzvot were, I'm not sure that's true, reading the text. So this is an enormous subject. So I want to address it briefly because I think it's relevant to understanding what's going on here. And essentially 3 major approaches to addressing this question. The first is the most famous, or well-known, I should say, which is Rashi. Rashi is based on 2 principles. The first principle is that the Torah's description. Does everybody understand where I'm going? I'm focused on chapter 24 of Shemot, partially because of its parallel to our story, but more importantly because of the suggestion that whatever Sefer HaBrit was, what Moshe read to the people at Har Sinai, is similar to what Yehoshua read to the people on Har Gerizim and Har Eval. And so I'm looking to identify this parallel.
Is it also connected to the word kahal? Like it says kahal in Yehoshua, I forget, where is it? The kahal, that everybody, right. And then it's connected to Vayakhel. And then
it could be interesting.
And then there was like a covenant and a renewal of a covenant.
Well, we're going to get to the covenant in a second, right?
Okay.
So here's Rashi. Rashi again. It's Rashi on Shemot Perchav Dalet. It's Rashi on that little episode at the end of Pashat Mishpatim. And we have to remember that it's 4 prakim after the description of Ma'amad Har Sinai. Says Rashi, Parsha zu nemra kodem aseret hadibrot. The entire chapter is out of order. Right. And this Parsha, Perach Dalet, is actually early. It's actually before Ma'amad Har Sinai. And it was on the 4th of Sivan. It's just a repeat of the events in order to explain more of the detail about the Brit and about the sprinkling of the blood and Moshe building the Mizbachot. And so we kind of repeat the story. There's a textual support for Rashi's suggestion in the opening phrase, Ve'el Moshe Amar Alei Alai Ahara, because this gets very technical, but the grammatical form in the Torah of using past tense without the reversal vav, the vav haipuch, is almost always past perfect tense, something which had happened earlier. So Ve'el Moshe Amar means God had said to Moshe earlier, come up the mountain. That's more or less the textual support for Rashi's position. Moshe was told to go up and tell the people, Kol Divrei Hashem. Well, if we're before Ma'amad Har Sinai, what Divrei Hashem is Moshe instructing them? If they're after Ma'amad, if the chapter is in order, so There's Parshat Yitro, and there's all of the laws of Mishpatim. But if we're before Mount Sinai, what words of God is Moshe instructing, commanding the people? Says Rashi, there was a mitzvah about separating for 3 days to prepare for the Kedusha of Mount Sinai. There was a rules or laws pertaining to the boundaries set for the mountain. So that's what they were told. Kol divrei Hashem v'et kol mishpatim. What were the mishpatim that Moshe was told to give the people? So if you remember the sequence of events, after they left Egypt, they come to Mara, and there in Mara, they're given a series of mitzvot. That's in the Parsha B'Shalach. Sam lo chok u'mishpat v'sham nisau. So Rashi says the mishpatim that were given here are the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach. That appears in Sefer Breshit. And Shabbat, Kibbur Av, Ve'em, Paraduma, and the dinim that were given to them in Mara. There were laws given to them prior to Mount Sinai. And here comes the clincher. Moshe takes the Sefer Habrit, writes it down, reads it publicly, and the people answer Nasa and Ishma. What is the Sefer Habrit, says Rashi? Mi Breshit be'ad matan Torah. U'mitzvot shenitztavu b'Mara. Sefer Breshit consists of everything up until that moment, which is Breshit Noach Lech Lecha Vayerech Hayesara Toldot Vayetze Vayishlach Vayeshev Miketz Vayigash Vayechi Breshit Eshmot Vayera Bo B'Shalach. That's Sefer Brit. Breshit V'ad Matan Torah. And over that Sefer Habrit, the people responded and said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we accept. You understand the problem here? Let me put it into very simple terms. Here's the ceremony. Moshe stands in front of the entire people. And he says to them, God is about to give you the Torah. And unlike the perception that the people accepted it without knowing what was in it, Moshe read it to them. And he read to them the story of Abraham, and he read to them the story of Yitzchak, and he read to them the story of Yaakov, and he read to them the story of the brothers, and he read to them Sipurei Avot, and he read to them all the legend, the story of creation, and he read to them the Yosef and his brothers. I'm not sure he showed them the musical, but he certainly read them the story. And he read to them how we went down to Egypt, and how God took us out of Egypt. And there's a handful of mitzvot involved. There's Paraduma, there's Shabbos, there's Kibbur Aveim, there's the Sheva Mitzvot B'nei Noach. You like it? They said yes. And then he hit them with 613 mitzvot, including the Aseret Dibrot. If I was amongst the people, I would have said, Moshe, that's called a Mekach Tos. You misled us. You read us Bible stories. He said, here's a sample, here's a cross-section sampling of the Torah. You read me Bible stories. And now you tell me that after I accepted the Bible stories that that's the Torah, now you tell me it's 613 mitzvot? Very problematic. I'm not the one who raised the problem. The Ramban, Ibn Ezra, all the Rishonim that critique with Rashi, they are very uncomfortable with Rashi's interpretation. And they suggest that Moshe read to them actual mitzvot, none of this Bible story stuff. Rabbi Avram, this is Ramban describing the Ibn Ezra, who says that the entire parsha is in order, from Yitro through Mishpatim, and all the laws of an elaboration of the Aseret Dibrot, and then we come to Sefer Habrit. Pashot Kulan Ba'ot Kogen. And then that's exactly what it is. The people said, Na'aseh v'nishma, they had heard the Aseret Dibrot, they had heard Pashat Mishpatim, they had all the laws of the Torah. Moshe Katav Bayam Mahu b'Sefer Habrit Kol Ma Shenitztara. He wrote down everything he was commanded. Chukim, Mishpatim, Torah. He got up in the morning and he read them Sefer Habrit. What is the Sefer Habrit? Karab Oznahem. All the mitzvot of the Torah, all the mitzvot of Pashat Mishpatim, the Aseret Dibrot, there wasn't an iota of the Torah that wasn't clarified for them. And then they said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we accept. That's a contract I can sign. You understand the problem? According to Rashi, he read them Bible stories. Okay. I'll come to the third opinion in a second. Where is this machloket from? The truth is that this machloket Rashi and Ramban is really two opinions in amongst Chazal. The Mechilta asks this question point blank and throws it on the table and says, "Vaikach Moshe Sefer, Vaikach Sefer Brit, Vaikra Moshe took the Sefer Brit and he read it to them. We don't know where he read from." Says Rabbi Yossi ben Rabbi Yehuda, Mitchilat Breshit v'ad kan. He read from the beginning of Breshit until this moment. That's exactly what Rashi says. Says Rabbi, no. He read to them the mitzvot given to Adam HaRishon, and he read to the mitzvot of Bnei Noach, and he read to them the mitzvot that they were given in Mitzrayim, and the mitzvot that were given in Mara, Ushar kol mitzvot kulan, and all the rest of the mitzvot. There wasn't a mitzvah left out. Sefer Dibot and all of its elaboration encapsulated in Parshat Mishpatim. Fine. That makes sense. Those are my two extreme opinions. Now I have a third opinion. And the third opinion, on the face of it, makes the least sense of all. I would argue, is actually the pshat. Chizkuni says the following. He agrees with Rashi that this was earlier, before Matan Torah. This is very important. He agrees with Rashi that this was before Matan Torah. Vayikach Sefer Habrit. What is the Sefer Habrit? Ein mukdam u'muchar. There's the Torah's parshiot out of sequence. This Sefer Habrit, hem hatochachot, is the tochacha of Pashat Bahar b'chukotai. It's the admonition that exists, that is written in the Parsha Bahar b'chukotai. As it says in the Mechilta. Says the Chizkuni, I'm going to grab two parshiot at the end of Sefer Vayikra, and they're going to be the text of Sefer Habrit that Moshe read to the people. How do I get to Sefer Vayikra? Parshat Bahar, Parshat B'chukotai? This is the third opinion in the Medrash, in the Mechilta. Opinion of Rabbi Shmuel. What is the Sefer Habrit? Does everybody see the text that I'm kind of dancing on the screen a little bit? Says Rabbi Yishmael, here's the Sefer Brit. I'll break it up for you. I'll tell you exactly what it says. Batchilata inyan, it opens with what? It opens with the laws of V'shavta Arat Shabbat Lashem, Sheish Shanim Tizvah Sadecha, V'sheish Shanim Tizmor Kamecha V'yasatat Tvuata, Shmitin Yovel, Brochot Uklalot. It's the laws of Shemitah, it's the laws of Yovel, it's the laws, and it's all the blessings and curses that come with it. Essentially, it's the Parsha Bahar. That's what Vayikra Chafei is, Parsha Bahar. And the Brachot HaKlalot, the Parsha B'chukotai. It starts with Shemitah and Yovel. Where does it end, this Sefer Habrit? Eila Chokim HaMishpatim V'Atorot. Shmot Perach Havav, which is the end of the Tochacha in Parshat B'chukotai. Amru, and they said, we accept it. Once they accepted it, he took the dam, he sprinkled it upon the people, and he said, you are now bound to this law. You've made a brit, you've made a covenant. Here's the blood of the sprinkle of the covenant. You are now committed. Tomorrow you will hear the rest of the mitzvot. How did we get to Parshat Bahar b'chukotai? It's like the oddest place to go if you're talking about Sefer Shmot, and suddenly you pulled something from Sefer Vayikra. What's the answer? In this, there's two pieces of information that are vitally important to understand this position of Rabbi Shmuel. Chumash is very structured. Each book of Chumash has a different arena. Sefer Breshit is in the land of Canaan. It's the story of how we got from a family of tribes to a nation and went down to Mitzrayim. Sefer Shmot is essentially the book of the Exodus, is the book of the exile in Egypt and the redemption from it. Sefer Vayikra, also known as Torah Kohanim, come to in a minute. Bamidbar is the story of the journey through the desert. It starts in Bamidbar as they begin to journey away from Har Sinai, and it ends on the edge of Arvot Moav as they're about to enter the land of Israel. And Sefer Dvarim in its entirety is on the edge of the book of the land of Israel, and in Arvot Moav, Moshe's speech to the people. Every book of Chumash has a different focus, a different place, a different arena. Let's see if I can do this without getting caught in the loop. Okay, this is the opening of the book of Vayikra. Opening pasuk. Vayikra el Moshe, Vaydaber Hashem elav me'ohel moed lemor. God called to Moshe and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. Does that mean anything? Why is that significant? Because if every Chumash has an arena, Breshit is in the land of Israel, Shmot is in exile and at Har Sinai, Bamidbar is in the desert, Devarim is on the edge of Arvot Moav. Where is Sefer Vayikra taking place? Sefer Vayikra is a conversation between God and Moshe that takes place. They've already built the Mishkan. Once they build the Mishkan, they build the Or Moed, the Shechina leaves Har Sinai and it enters into the Or Moed. And will never come back to Har Sinai. The Shechina is now in the tent of meeting in the Or Moed. And Vayikra Moshe, we've moved the Shechina to the Or Moed. The Mishkan now represents a sort of a traveling Har Sinai, if you will. And the conversation between God and Moshe will always now be in Or Moed. They spend a year camped at Har Sinai. God speaks to Moshe strictly from the Or Moed. You with me?
But they're still at Har Sinai, you're saying?
They're not, it doesn't matter. It's not about being at Har Sinai. They're in the Or Moed. They could be anywhere, but the Mishkan is encamped around Har Sinai. But the conversation between God and Moshe is Or Moed. There is no more conversation on Har Sinai. Har Sinai loses all Kedusha. It loses any status once the Shekhinah moves to the Or Moed. That's the end of Sefer Shmot. The very last psukim of Sefer Shmot is Nanet Or Moed. The Shechina that was on Har Sinai has now moved to the Or Moed, and the Shechina will remain. The cloud upon that was on Har Sinai, the cloud is now in the Mishkan, Uchvod Hashem Alei Mishkan, and the Eish is in the Mishkan. Everything is in the Mishkan. Vayikra Moshe me'or Moed lemor. They do not go back to conversation of God and Moshe at Har Sinai ever. That's very important. Because what I just said doesn't seem to be true. Because take a look at the beginning of Parshat Bahar. Vayikra Perek Chavhei. The last section, 2 parshiot of Parshat of Sefer Vayikra, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Behar Sinai Lemor. That's what it's called, Parshat Bahar. It's my bar mitzvah parsha. I know that. Right? It's Bahar Sinai. And it's the laws of Shemitah, and it's the laws of Yovel, and it's the laws of the counting of the Yovel, and it's the laws of all kinds of laws pertaining to the Kedusha of the land of Israel, and how you manage the land, and how you manage the agriculture, Shemitah, Yovel. Then we move into...
But maybe that's out of order.
Hang on a second. That's what the Chizkuni says. I'll come back to it. Right? And then you get to the Tochacha. If you will observe my commandments, and you will have these blessings, A, B, C, D, blessing, 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 blessing. If you don't listen to me and you don't keep my commandments, then you will have curse. A, B, curse 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the curses of Parshat Bechukatai. How do the curses of Parshat Bechukatai end? Ela chukim v'mishpatim v'atorot asher natan Hashem beno v'en bnei Yisrael behar Sinai. Bahar b'chukotai is a unit. Shemitah, Yovel, and the Tochacha, the blessings and curses, the consequences. It's a unit, and it Bahar Sinai comes along the Chizkuni and says, fascinating. Ein mukdam u'muachar. This Sefer Habrit is the parsha of the Bahar B'chukotai as a unit was read to the people back at Har Sinai. This is Sefer Habrit. That's exactly what Rabbi Yishmael says. What's Sefer Habrit? It starts with Shavta Haaretz, beginning of Parshat Bahar. Vayikra Hashem Moshe Bahar Sinai v'Shavta Haaretz Shabbat LaHashem Sheish Shanim Tizvas Adechal Shemitah Yovel Brachot Uklalot all of B'chukotai, and it ends at the end of B'chukotai, which also says Bahar Sinai. I gave you the psukim down here below. Fascinating, according to the Chizkuni and according to Rabbi Yishmael, and I would argue it's really the pshat of the structure of Sefer Vayikra. The brit that we're talking about is the brit of the tochacha, the consequences. Meaning, think about it from this perspective, if this is correct, now I go back to Nasiv and Ishma. What did Moshe say to Bnei Israel back in, where's Shemot? Do I have it still up here? All right, let's go to Shemot. Assuming this perek is before Ma'amad HaSinai, which is what the Chizkuni is saying, Moshe takes Sefer Habrit, which begins with the laws of the land of Israel, and he reads them to the people, and he essentially says to the people, tomorrow you're going to hear the mitzvot of the Torah. Tomorrow you're going to hear a brit, you're going to hear the elaborate details of the laws of the Torah. For today, here's what you need to know. If you accept this law, then you can go on your journey to the land of Israel and you can stay there. If you don't accept this law, then you will be punished, persecuted, and threatened. And eventually, if you don't continue to listen to this law, you will be exiled from that land. You don't know what's in the Torah. All you have is Sefer Brit, which is the book of the Tochacha, the Brachot Uklalot, the consequences. And it's the covenant of consequences that the people said yes to. Nasiv and Ishma.
They had no choice.
And whether they have a choice or not is a whole different shir. I'm going to, for now, take the Torah at face value. They had every choice they want. They had a choice. There's a medrash. There's a very famous Gemara about Kafalim Harke Gigit. It's a complicated Gemara. I'm going to leave it for now because it becomes very complicated. But at least the way the Torah presents it, he gave them a choice. But the chiddush here, the uniqueness is that what he read to them wasn't the laws of the Torah, and it wasn't the stories of Breshit. It was the consequences of obedience and disobedience. That takes gevura. That takes strength. That takes what the Medrash says is the gevura of the Malachim. That's the Nasiv and Ishmael's Gibor Koach. Because what they had to say is, even if they didn't know what was in the Torah, that they were willing to take upon themselves the consequence, that their entire dream of the land of Israel was predicated upon their loyalty to this Brit. That's Sefer Habrit. And if you think about it, we don't have time to go through all of it, but if you go through the Tochacha in Parshat Ki Tavo, you'll see that over and over and over again, the reference in the reference in the Tochacha B'chukatai is a constant reference to the Brit. If you will keep the commandments, I will multiply you, and I will make you fruitful, and you will grow, etc. I will fulfill my covenant, establish my covenant with you. Or in Pasuk Tedvav, in B'chukatai timasu, if you don't keep my commandments, la'afrechem et briti, and violate my brit. Over and over again. The reference to the Brit is the central theme of the parsha. V'sacharti et briti Yaakov, v'avet briti Yitzchak, v'avet briti Avraham, and then it goes on. V'sacharti et brit Rishonim asher hotzeti otam me'eretz Mitzrayim. The reference to the Brit is consistent. In Parshat Ki Tavo, at the end of Chumash, we even have, let's see if this will work now. Yes. When the second tochacha appears at the end of Parshat Kitavo, the pasuk there says, "Eile divrei abrit asher tzivah Hashem et Moshe lichvot et bnei Yisrael be'eretz Moav." Moshe makes a second brit with them at Arvot Moav, right? The second tochacha, brachot uklalot, the brit of consequences. Milvad habrit asher karati tam b'chorev, besides the covenant that he made with them at Har Sinai. Meaning, the Brit of Kitavo is exactly a repeat, elaborated of the Brit that he made with them at Har Sinai. But the Brit that he made with them at Har Sinai over the Tochacha is Pashat Bahar B'chukatai. That's exactly the message. I would go one step further. This notion that the Sefer HaBrit is a constant reference to the consequences, the Tochacha, the blessings and curses in the Torah, has a really interesting role in a story in Tanakh, in Navi, in Malachim Bet, in the story of Yoshiyahu. Because Yoshiyahu, in part of his reformation to restore the Beit HaMikdash, in that context, it says that they found the Sefer Torah. Whether they found an entire Sefer Torah or they found a portion of the Torah that was used for the mitzvah of Hakel is a whole discussion. But in all cases, they bring the Sefer to the Sefer, and then bring it to the Navi, and they open it up, and they start to read. It doesn't say what they read, but it doesn't tell us what portion they read. But it says, "V'itzav hamelech et Chilkiyahu Kohen," and etc. And l'chud Yeshua Hashem badi. Where am I missing a piece? "V'hi kishma hamelech et divrei Sefer HaTorah v'yikrat b'kadav." The moment he heard the reading of this Sefer, he tore his garments and he commands the people, "We're not doing enough. We have to do more. We have to. Otherwise, if we don't do more, then we're going to be in trouble." And they go to the Navi. They go to Huldah Neviah, and she tells them that there are going to be consequences if they don't bring this, if they don't do more for this. Huldah says to them, what you've read is correct. If you don't do more, there will be consequences. There will be punishment. You will be exiled. This is what you read in the Torah. Every indication is that they didn't just read the Torah and be inspired by it. They read a very specific portion of the Torah. They read the Tochacha. How is it that they opened up the Sefer Torah and they read the Tochacha? Says the Radak and many of the Mefarshim, "Vayikish Shma HaMelech, ki matzu ha-sefer niglal b'pashat Tochachot." When they found the Sefer Torah, they opened it up and they found it and literally sitting on the parsha of the Tochachot. In this case, b'chukatai, not Bahar, but it's the same message. And if you look at the beginning of Perek Chaf Gimel, Yoshiyahu brings all the people to Yerushalayim. The king gets up on a big stage, with all the people and the Kohanim and the Neviim. Vayikra ba'oznehem et kol divrei Sefer HaBrit hanimtza b'Beit Hashem. And he reads them the words of the Book of the Covenant. He didn't sit and read to them all 5 books of the Torah. We have enough trouble listening to one parsha in Shulman Shabbos. Can you imagine standing there for 12 hours reading the entire book of the Torah from beginning from Bereshit to the Lein Kol Yisrael? Absurd. He read Sefer HaBrit. And in exactly the same fashion, he read them the Tochacha, Vayichwot et HaBrit, and he enacted the covenant with them. What was the enactment of the covenant? Alechat achar Hashem, to observe the laws, Yishmor mitzotav, betotav, v'chukatav, v'chol nefesh, lakim et divrei HaBrit azot, to establish the Brit. That's exactly what he did. Now I come back to Yehoshua. Now I understand exactly what's going on. Divrei HaTorah habracha be'haklala kichol hakatuv b'sefer HaTorah. This is the Brit of the blessings and curses and Hagrizim and Hareva. This is the Tochacha. This is exactly what he did. He brought them to Har Gerizim and Areval. He stood them 6 on one mountain and 6 on the other, so that they could reenact the experience of Ma'amad Har Sinai, so that they could reenact the experience of accepting the Torah or accepting the Brit, the consequences for the Torah. Meaning, they don't have to read the whole Torah. They have to read that the Torah that they know, that they've been living, that they've been given, this Torah has consequences. You accept it, great. You don't accept it, you don't accept it. That's the way it works.
Excuse me, where did Moshe Rabbeinu get this from Hashem, this section?
Which section are you talking about?
The Klala Ubracha.
Yeah, well, it appears twice. It appears once in Parashat
Yeah,
Bahar.
but he got it before Sinai.
Yes, according to this, he got it before Sinai. Correct. He wrote it down. Hashem gave it to him. He told it to him. He wrote it down, and he shared it with the people. Correct. It just has two versions. It has a pre-Sinai version, which is Bahar B'chukatai, and it has a post-Midbar 40 years version, which is the Tochacha of Kitavo. Right? That's exactly why in the end of Kitavo it says, Eila Divrei Abrit, at the end of Kitavo, Eila Divrei Abrit, Asher Tziva Hashem et Moshe, Milvad Abrit, Asher Karati Tam B'Choreb. I have two versions of the Tochacha and Chumash. Bahar B'chukatai, which was given to them before Har Sinai, and the Tochacha and Kitavo, which includes the ceremony of the blessings and curses on Har Gerizim and Areval, which was given to them in Avot Moav after. That's exactly right. Now, and then I come back to the story in Yehoshua. He takes the stones and he writes the words of the Torah, which is why I don't think it necessarily means that he wrote the entire 630 mitzvot and all the Torah on a group of stones. Could be that what he wrote there was the words of the Brit, like Sefer HaBrit that Moshe wrote, which is the Tochacha. In this case, it's the Tochacha of the blessings and curses of Kitavo. He read the words of the Torah, not the whole 613 mitzvot and Breshit and all 5 books, the words of the Bracha and Klala, as described in the Torah. That's exactly where it leaves off. But then it's missing one thing. You understand the structure that I've suggested? But now I'm missing something. I'm missing two things, really. I'm missing the why. Why is it necessary to do this again? They've already did it twice. They did it at Har Sinai, and they did it in Avot Moav. Why is it necessary to do again on Shechem? Ostensibly, the answer is because they wanted the Brit to be connected to the land of Israel. We'll elaborate on that. And the second question is, so where's the response of the people? Where's the Nasiv and Ishma? Torah says, Vanu kol am amen. Maybe they said amen, but that's it. Where's the Nasiv and Ishma? So those are the two questions we have to explore next week. Why is it necessary? And what was the response of the people? But what I think is clear, and this is what I've tried to suggest, is that when Yehoshua wrote the words of the Torah on the stones, and then he read it to the people as a Sefer HaBrit, it's the same Sefer HaBrit in content and theme as the Sefer HaBrit of the Tochacha in Parshat Kitavo, and the same Sefer HaBrit that Moshe read to the people before Ma'amad Har Sinai, before the Torah. And the concept of Nasiv and Ishma takes on a whole new meaning. Because Nasiv and Ishma means they accepted the consequences, the covenant of consequences, before they knew the content of the contract. That's a fascinating piece of the story. All right. We have 5 minutes past our time, so we'll stop here. And thank you for listening. If there are questions, I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes and take questions. But otherwise, we will continue this story B'ezrat Hashem next week.
Wonderful as always. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Why can't the Na'aseh v'Nishma just saying that, like if you have a covenant, you have to have two sides to the covenant. So like maybe not the consequences necessarily, but they're accepting the covenant that they have with Hashem.
Nasa v'nishma can mean many things. Nasa simply means, I think they're almost synonymous. Nishma means hayam shamoa tishma'u, to observe. But the bigger question is, what is the Sefer Brit? That's the bigger question.
Right,
What did he read to them? Assuming that this is an early, that this is before Mount Sinai, that's really the fascinating issue. So what did he read to them? And according to this opinion, which is that he read to them the Tochacha out of left field, but there's so much textual support for that suggestion that it really becomes a whole new conversation. That the consequences was articulated before the content of the mitzvot. That's really an extraordinary novel.
Shulman.
It's a pleasure to see you all.
Thank you so much. It was fascinating.
You understand that the tochacha is both sides of the coin? That just as it's written out, arur X, arur Y, arur Z.
Correct. That's the corresponding baruch. Correct.
Right.
Corresponding baruch.
Correct.
And then it all falls in. If that's
we talked about that. We talked about that at the beginning.
Exactly. So that then everything falls into place because you understand the negative consequences, but you also understand positive consequences.
100%. The Chiddush is not the brachot klalot of Hagrizim and Areval. The Chiddush is that's the Sefer Habrit of Mamad Hasinai. That's the Chiddush. Okay? According to the Chizkuni and according to this third opinion in the Medrash, which I think from a textual perspective is very powerful. And in Dvarim as well, and in the case of Yoshiyahu as well. That's the Chiddush. For Yoshiyahu, for Yehoshua, it's clear that there's two sides is brachot klalot. That's very much in the text. But so next week we'll connect the dots one more step, which is why it was necessary to do this ceremony 3 times. Hasinai, Avot Moav, and now again in Shechem. And where's the response of the people? Those are the 2 questions we'll address. All right, I'm going to sign off. Thank you all for listening.
Rabbi,
Thank you.
Rabbi, I sent you something in the chat.
Sent me something in the chat. Fine, I will save it.
Alan Crowley.
I will
Has nothing to do with the Quran.
Save chat. Okay, I will save it and take a look at it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Be well.